Hello, everyone. My name is William Liu, and this is Artificial Intelligence Research, also known as A.I.R, which is a great acronym. So, this is basically just a series of podcasts or interviews with people that may be interested or a part of the artificial intelligence development or companies like that. So, anyway, before we get started, of course, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? My guest here is Charlie Liu, and yeah, what's
Yes.
your story?
Hello. I'm Charlie. Uh, I recently graduated from Princeton with a degree in computer science. So I'm very interested in computer science and artificial intelligence. Although I am going to be working in quantitative trading this next year. But yeah,
Could you tell me a little bit about quantitative trading? Because I don't know too much about that.
sure. Uh, it's essentially what my company does is we trade stocks. We make markets, which just means we're available to buy or sell from pretty much from most people. Uh, and except so the quantitative part just means it's a little we do a lot more like technology based trading than your average trader, I suppose. But yeah, technology and artificial intelligence.
That's cool. I know we haven't really started with the artificial intelligence talk, but uh, do you guys apply it to your career? Like, how do you use artificial intelligence in that process?
Uh, Considering I haven't started working there yet, so I can't speak too much to whether they use it. I do know to some degree that I have used it in my projects that I was given, but it would certainly be a lot simpler than kind of the cutting edge algorithms and models you see these days, but much more fundamental and simple. Yeah.
All right. So, as you know, this series is based on artificial intelligence, and you just told us about your job and a little bit about how it's used. But is there any other prior experience you have with artificial intelligence anywhere, like in a class or a job, or have you just seen it around anywhere? Like any prior experience?
Uh, I have some experience. So I've taken several courses on kind of like the fundamentals of machine learning stuff like that. I also did a project where for my independent work, which was uh, essentially using deep learning models to match a musical score to a recording. So trying to like find the timestamps of each event that in the music, so to speak. And that used actually a couple different deep learning models, both for the transcript, so the words basically. It was for songs. So one aspect was trying to match the words in the audio to the transcript, and the other aspect was trying to identify the pitches that were being sung in the audio as well.
That's really cool, actually, like analyzing music. I never thought of applying artificial intelligence in that way. So could you also explain what deep learning and machine learning is? Because you use those, but
Oh, yes. So I think machine learning is more the blanket term. Although artificial intelligence is even broader, but machine learning really is. Uh, I'm no expert, so this could be very well be wrong. But
that's
my
fine.
understanding is it's essentially we build models which using some form of data and some form of assumptions that we make. Those models try to learn from usually data, but they try to learn from what we know. That could be data, that could be knowledge that we try to input into that model. And then those models go and predict or classify or do a variety of basically trying to identify things or predict things. Um, more specifically, deep learning is actually a kind of a subset of machine learning. And deep learning is where I'm not sure if it's only neural networks, but that neural networks are the big thing there, I think. And it's called deep because very simply speaking, there's a lot of layers to the networks. So essentially, each time you have your input data, that goes through a layer, it gets transformed by that layer, and then it goes through a bunch of layers. That's kind of the deep part of it. And and each layer transforms it in some way or another, and then these layers are all learning at the same time from some data in order to, take our input and get some output that we want. So that's kind of what deep learning is. It's typically very data based because it's very based on data because when you have that many layers, it's really hard. It's virtually impossible to manually do it or even understand what happens. But what happens with your final model, other than it works and we know how we trained it, we just don't know exactly what it's doing. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. I'm also not really an expert, so thanks for explaining. And I suppose that's why I'm doing research on it. Moving on, what importance, I guess, does AI have to you, if any? Like, are you excited for the future of artificial intelligence?
Hmm. I don't think I have too much stake in how artificial intelligence is going, but I certainly think it's really interesting, and I think I think in the next, I don't know, 20 some years, it's going to be really formative years, I think, because I think it's in various fields, it's actually reaching a point, or already has reached, for some fields, it already has reached a point where it is on par with humans or even beating humans, and uh, in certain tasks, and you know it's great that it's so powerful these days, but also I think what I'm really interested in seeing is kind of how that's going to affect uh what's the word affect, I guess, the well-being of people in general. um I guess society in general, although that's a very general statement, but also I think with how impactful I think it will be, I'm also just interested in learning about how people plan to regulate it, or you know protect people, like about all those like trials with like Facebook and all the data privacy stuff. Like, I think there's going to be far more problems in the future, and that's just really interesting stuff. Although I don't think, directly to me, I don't think I use it too much in my daily life. Aside from like websites that use it, that I use and such.
I see. Do you think that because AI is going to have such a big impact in the future and there could be problems, and do you think that in general now people should be educated or learning more about artificial intelligence?
Hmm, that's a really interesting question. I think it's a little complicated to go into the actual models. And well, okay, there are very basic models. I think those might be interesting, but I don't think it's super important that people know what they are. But if you really want to dive into the fundamentals of machine learning, it is fairly heavy in like math and statistics. But I do think statistics is woefully under taught. I think statistics is, I would say, one thing that could be more important to really make sure people have a better grasp of is statistics, because it's huge in machine learning, because it's basically, and it's very largely based on data, especially nowadays. It's basically all learning from data, or learning from itself, but most of the time it's from data. And understanding kind of the biases of models and how that happens, and more generally how biases occur with statistics, and all that. I think that's something that's important. Um, but I think it's a little, it'd be great if everybody had a good understanding of the fundamentals of machine learning, but I think that's a little infeasible in terms of how much effort that would take.
I see. So statistics has a huge role in artificial intelligence.
Mm, yeah. You're pretty basically the way the models learn is pretty much statistics. How in terms of like how people decide to do these things, like because you have to make a lot of design choices, like why or and you need to have a reason why you're doing each thing, right? So generally these are like based on statistics principles and stuff like that.
I see. So that could be sort of viewed as a drawback, right? I read online somewhere that an artificial intelligence robot was asked to put blocks with people's faces on them into like certain categories. And then scientists found that when they asked the robot to, for example, put the doctor in the box, there were certain biases. Do you think like these biases in sort of the databases or flawed data, I guess, is that like a big problem for artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I actually think that's I don't claim to be an expert on tech policy, but I think it is one of the biggest issues in my opinion. Because at its very core, so like kind of the motivation behind data, machine learning based on data, it's you use this data, you learn from this data, and then you assume everything else is like this data. And this inherently leads to a lot of reliance on the training data, kind of the data that you use to learn from. And so you have to be very careful with that because the models, I don't know about cutting edge models, but like most models are not designed to counter biases. They're designed to learn from what they're given. They do that very well. But if they're given biased data, then they're gonna have that bias in there. And so that's kind of the big problem. Like it's not that people are building in biases to the models themselves. It's that the data needs to be um, as unbiased as possible. And so, if that makes sense, I guess what I mean is like that kind of is the there aren't really many other problems I see with models um, in terms of how they can acquire biases. Obviously, some people can write models that do have biases on their own, but it's actually a little tricky to do that, and it's generally not done. So,
All right, so biases are one of the weaknesses of artificial intelligence. But what do you think or could you list out the strengths of artificial intelligence in your opinion?
um, so actually, while we were talking about biases, like in a way, I think it's a double-edged. I don't think double-edged sword is the word, but basically, I think it can also be a strength in that it learns from data very well. Like
Yeah,
nowadays, it models are really good at learning from data. So if you give it good data, it's going to learn well most of the time. And so that is a good thing, but it also is a bad thing because if you give it bad data, I think another thing with it now is kind of um, I think it's become very accessible and to train your own models these days, and I think that's good because I guess it's just good in itself that it's accessible, but also I think it's proven to be very effective and even better than humans at various things. Right? I remember seeing something about I think it was detecting some form of cancer in X-rays or something,
yeah.
but either way, like it could just save so much human time and effort if we could automate things using AI. And there are a lot of like really boring things that seem like we're on the cusp of being able to do to just automate that. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths. Mm, I'd say that's the main strength I can think of right now.
So is it it's very interesting how like it's sort of impressionable, I guess, if that's like a good word to say. Like, is it sort of like a baby learning from its parents? Like, it can pick up good habits or like bad habits.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor actually. Yeah. Um, and similarly, with humans, like I think you kind of you're much more impressionable and you learn much quicker when you're younger, right?
Hmm.
In a similar way, a lot of models, or pretty much all good models, do a similar thing where initially they're learning a lot quicker and later on they're just adjusting. But I guess that's a little less important, but that is just how it works. But yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So I guess that metaphor could be used to teach people. But on the topic of like spreading awareness or spreading knowledge, I suppose, what do you think people misunderstand about AI the most?
Uh, hmm. That's a tough one because I honestly don't really know what people think of AI that well.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of true.
uh, I think I think one of the things that I think I may have briefly touched on, but one of the things I think un is a little bit unknown or just not well known is so a lot of the cutting edge models, like we know what we did and kind of the motivation and a lot of the high level ideas behind it and why we chose those things. So we have a good high level understanding of why they work. But is I guess right now what I have in mind is computer vision, like for example, identifying cars in an image or identifying like CAPTCHA it asks you to identify like fire hydrants, in an
Yeah.
image, and it's to prevent bots because this is a not that easy of a task, and the thing is, even the best ones, they may perform well, but oftentimes we don't really understand exactly what's going on within them. Although we usually have some ideas, like depending on, I guess, how it's made, how clearly you can interpret the model. But oftentimes, it's neural networks can be described as black boxes in that they do things and they work, and we don't really know what they're doing.
Really?
Uh, but don't get me wrong. Like we know we people who make neural networks, like they made very conscious decisions in how the neural network should learn, what it should learn, how it should learn, how fast it should learn, and all these things are are decided by people who know what they're doing. But once it's done learning, it's learned like this giant like matrix or whatever, of values which it will use to predict things in the future. That giant matrix, like it's very hard for people to really understand what that means and what it's doing. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So on a, like we've all seen like movies or heard rumors, I guess, of like AI, like in Terminator that
Right.
the I forget what it's called, but the bad guys.
Isn't that just the Terminator?
Well, the
Oh,
organization
Skynet.
behind. Wait, what?
Skynet or something?
Oh, right, Skynet.
Yeah.
So I guess some a concern that has been voiced a lot, or a question that has been posed a lot, I guess,
Yeah.
is do you think AI could ever achieve sentience?
The thing is, I feel like this is starting to encroach on philosophy territory, um, because you really need to define sentience, right? But I guess to spare the discussion of the philosophical discussion, I think um, I would say no. I think at the end of the day, it's all numbers and stuff that numbers and algorithms that have been designed, and it can mimic life and such. Even maybe theoretically it can mimic it perfectly, but I guess this is somewhat inserting my philosophical belief, but I don't think that that would qualify as sentient, even if it perfectly mimicked life, because at the end of the day, we wrote it, we stuff like that. I guess.
Right. So basically, since they're like learning from us and they're basically just learning and copying what we do, if they ever like achieve sort of sentient. So that's basically they didn't become sentient on their own. They basically just learned what we do and copied it. So that's not really sentience. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. Roughly speaking, yeah.
I see. Very interesting. So is it safe to say that they're never gonna take over the world in the distant future?
Uh, if you're talking about something like in Terminator, I think that's extremely unlikely because I could see maybe some malicious actors like uh, I don't know, somehow using AI to take over the world or something like that. Maybe, but I don't think AI would be able to do it on its own, kind of like how in Terminator it happens. Um, just because I think as AI becomes more and more powerful and people kind of realize the dangers of it, um, people will be more will hopefully be more vigilant in putting in, I guess, fail safes, and I think regulation and like laws will need to be passed. Of course, that's not going to catch everything, but I think in terms of cutting edge AI right now, it's very I don't it's not really like anyone who wants to use the cutting edge stuff can do it. It I think it will be very difficult for somebody to get through all of the hopeful all the barriers and preventive measures that I think will be in place to in order to use AI to take over the world or something.
Right. I see. So in that case, what, well, I guess it's a little unrelated to what we just talked about, but moving on anyway. What do you think one of the biggest challenges for AI is, on the other hand?
What kind of challenge? Like,
For I guess both for like developing it and for like the AI itself. I if that makes any sense.
mm, I think, well, in terms of the biggest challenge that I believe currently exists in AI, it's so AI is very good at emulating and replicating, I guess, like our higher cognitive functions or however you want to call them, kind of like doing math or like statistics, all that. But the thing that it struggles a lot with is a lot of the things that come really intuitively to us. So like moving our hands, balancing, like that's really tough, I think, as far as I'm aware. Um, so I think the brain is just really complicated. I think
Yeah,
it's AI is doing very well, but there's still a long way to go before doing that. Um, you said a challenge for the AI itself, or a challenge for developing it. I guess the challenge for developing it is. I guess another challenge is at some point, which in the not too distant future, computers will stop getting faster, right? Something like that. Assume if we ignore like I guess quantum computers, which may be coming someday, who knows? But at the current rate, it seems that computers won't be getting faster forever. So at some point, people will just have to keep getting more better models, more efficient rather than more computing power. So that's also another thing that I think will someday become a challenge.
So tell us the difference between like computing power and like efficiency, or could you like explain that last part a bit?
Oh yeah, yeah. So computing power just means you have more, I don't know, CPUs, more or GPUs or whatever. You have more processing power. You have uh like roughly speaking, like you just have more computers worth of power, so to speak. Um, Whereas efficiency is more like algorithm, how fast the algorithm is. So for example, if I want to sort a list, I could just randomly I could just move the elements randomly and hope it's and check if it's sorted and do that over and over, but that would take forever. Um, Whereas a much more efficient algorithm could just, I mean, much more efficient than that, anyways. It's just what a human would do. You would just take the smallest element, put it at the start, and so on, right? Um, so it's basically just how fast the algorithm is relative to the input. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess both have to be improved upon as time goes on.
Yeah. I mean, computing power, it doesn't, it's gonna get better. I think that's pretty expected.
So on the topic of, I guess, developing AI, do you think, well, not just developing AI, just AI in general in the future, do you have any advice to people working on it or the perhaps the government on regulating it or any sort of advice or things that you hope would be in the future?
Uh, I think, I guess just like, I guess don't take it for granted. Like, just, I think one of the things I find pretty important is to understand what you're using, what you're doing. I think just making sure that you're always like understanding what you're doing, how it could go wrong, and stuff like that is crucial. So just, I guess, exercising caution and really knowing what you're doing is. I don't. I can't say anything too specific, but yeah, I guess.
I see. Is there anything you hope is developed in the future? Like, it can be anything. Do you think there's anything in your life or in the world that you want artificial intelligence to improve?
Yeah, if there was a way to automate brushing my teeth, that'd be great. Uh, Also, self-driving cars would be great. Even though Tesla's kind of getting there, but they're not quite there yet. So once
Mm.
that's out, that would be great. Yeah.
So facial recognition, I don't know if you use it on your phone. Like I know that phones can be unlocked using facial recognition.
Yeah.
And that's sort of that is like a part of artificial intelligence. Do you think that facial recognition should be used for security purposes, or do you think it's like an invasion of privacy? Should people even be developing that kind of stuff?
I mean, I think I'm sure there are uses for it. I don't think there's any reason to outright not develop that at all. Uh, I think it can be a privacy concern easily. Um, but there are, I guess, safe practices, so to speak. Like there are ways that you could have a facial recognition model to help you open, unlock your phone or something. Where it saves it. Obviously, it has to save it to be able to recognize your face, but like it doesn't have to use that for anything else, right? It's just like you implicitly assume if you put a password into your set a password for your phone, it's not sending that to Apple so that they can use that so that they can put that in a database, right?
Yeah,
So it's the same idea, I think. So I think it's fine to use it for security. Obviously, not for like the very very important security. I don't think that's secure enough, but unless you really trust your models. But I don't. But I think it. I wouldn't be super worried about privacy concerns as long as there's sufficient regulation, I guess.
all right. So another issue I'm sort of concerned about even though I have legitimately zero knowledge about the topic, is hacking, I guess. Like, is hacking a legitimate problem for artificial intelligence?
Uh, I I would say it seems I really don't think so. In what sense are you asking the question, or if you mean just generally, I can kind of elaborate. But
I guess generally, because I'm very not knowledgeable about hacking or how that stuff works anyway.
uh, yeah, so with when it comes to hacking, well, I'm gonna put a disclaimer, which is that I'm just gonna for now I'm just gonna say that if quantum computers are invented, then it will be a big problem. Uh, or like quantum computers that are feasible to use and much larger than the ones that exist now, then it could be a problem. But ignoring quantum computers for now, it's the majority of like hacks and leaks are all are because of some sort of like social engineering because somebody accidentally put in their password into a fake a fake login page or something and stuff like that.
Uh,
And in terms of like cryptography, these days is it's pretty much it's virtually impossible to break through that without some form of like social engineering or somebody made a mistake and like in the code or something, and that's a vulnerability. But if you do it correctly, like there's really no way to do it unless you get unreasonably lucky or something. And I guess the one thing I wasn't too sure about as far as how this relates to AI is like perhaps there could be some sort of password guesser or something like that, or like uh, which could be based on AI. But with that, I mean, maybe you could do something with that, but all people have to do is choose better passwords, and that would be useless. Like if you just use one of those, I guess, password generators that also store your passwords. If you just choose random passwords, even an artificial intelligence thing will not be able to crack that.
I see. Uh, so first, I want you to explain a bit about quantum computers, and then I guess I want to ask, is it possible to like hack the artificial intelligence itself?
Oh, that's your question. Okay. So as for quantum computers, so I don't really understand all that well either myself, but the gist of why it would be a big problem if there were large quantum computers is one of the main encryption methods today is it's a little involved to explain why this actually encrypts anything, but basically being able to factor a very large number, um, that is kind of the basis of that is the basis of one of the main methods of encryption today. And being able to find those factors from just the product of the factors is actually really hard. And there's no fast way to do that. But if you had a quantum computer, it actually becomes quite easy to do that. And so that's the problem. That would break any encryption using that method. There are methods that I think people are investigating that I don't know if anybody's found one that is definitely quantum safe, but people are definitely looking into quantum safe cryptography. That just means if there are quantum computers, they won't break it. I don't know what the state of that is, but if you're interested, you can look at that. As for hacking the artificial intelligence, I wouldn't call it hacking. You could feed it malicious data. For example, if this were some model that we're trying to learn on like customers on a website or something, you could, I guess, make a bunch of fake accounts and try to introduce a bias by giving it bad data. That's very much, possible. Uh, Usually websites have something built in to try to prevent that. Like, for example, just not letting the same IP create more than one account, or like preventing people from making too many accounts and stuff like that. But that is definitely something to consider if you're going to use something that could take data from just public sources or sources that anybody could modify, then that is definitely something to think about. Um,
Kind of like Wikipedia or something.
yeah, like if you had a model that was learning from Wikipedia, I mean, it's fine to learn from Wikipedia, but if you want to use it for something important, it does come with those risks for sure.
Yeah,
But I wouldn't really call it hacking though. Hacking's a little bit more like it's a little bit different flavor, I guess.
I see. I'm glad you know like comp sci stuff related to artificial intelligence. It clears up a lot of things for me.
Oh, that's good.
So, a few last questions. I guess another issue or thing being talked about is, do you think artificial intelligence will replace our jobs? And well, yeah, first answer that, I suppose.
Hmm. I think uh, I think it could replace a good number of jobs in the future. Uh, I don't know if it will because hmm, I don't I know far too little about macroeconomics and stuff like that to really say, but I would imagine it can't be good if a bunch of people lose their jobs because of AI. So I would imagine probably from a from a legal standpoint or something, they will try to prevent that. But I think in terms of like it being capable of doing a lot of jobs, I think that will occur in the future.
Do you think there are any jobs that are irreplaceable or
Uh, I mean, if you're talking like long-term future, no. But in terms of like, I guess things that I think are really tough to do, it would be, I guess, ones that require more human interaction. I guess, for example, being a politician, that might be. I
Hmm.
don't know how you would go about doing that, but again, I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't say anything's impossible forever. But um, there's some things that are definitely a far way out. Like also, I think generally speaking, the medical profession, uh, perhaps not the entire profession, just more like surgeons, uh, because that requires a lot of precision and there's a lot of a lot at stake. So I think that might be something that would take much longer, if ever. You know, and then anything with high stakes and that robots are not known to be perfect at. Yeah.
how about art? Uh, as an
That's a
artist
good
myself, I'm very interested.
that's a good point. I didn't even think of it, but oh, I don't know. I think someday if it could, if robots or if artificial intelligence could like emulate the brain to like such lengths that it would be able to create art, then perhaps it will be able to make some form of art. But again, this might be a little bit philosophical, but is it really art if AI made it? I don't know. So I think in terms of meaningful art, I don't think that can be replaced by artificial intelligence. Um, I mostly say this because like if somehow artificial intelligence could make music or art or stuff like that or literature like humans do, like who's gonna I don't care about reading that because or reading, listening, looking at it because an AI made it. So in that sense, I
Ah,
don't think it's replaceable. But and I also think it would be really difficult to replace it anyways. So I think it's very unlikely that it will be able to even emulate it. But if it can, I still don't think it will replace it.
yeah, there is this really like human um, aspect of art that I guess would be very hard to emulate.
Yeah.
And just jobs similar to that, like requiring a lot of human input, like thoughts, I suppose those would also probably be very hard to replicate.
Yeah, I think the further you get from like quantitative, mathy, or like structured things, the further you get from that, I think the harder it gets, very roughly speaking. But that's what I would say.
So I guess both AI and humans obviously have their own benefits.
Yeah.
So one last question. Theoretically, if an artificial intelligence robot woman asked you out, would you give her a chance?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Uh, hmm. I don't think so. That seems a little little odd.
Well, I
But
guess that summarizes why not. I mean, I would also probably say no. It's obviously very strange, but who knows? Maybe in the future something like that could happen. But
it's
anyway,
possible.
yeah. Um, I don't know if I'd want to see that happen, but it's possible.
Yeah.
So anyway, that summarizes like everything I wanted to talk about today. Is there anything you'd like to say or answer or maybe just like tell the viewers or anything before we end it?
Uh, yeah, I think you covered a broad range of important questions and topics in AI. So.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot from this actually. I didn't know, even though I'm doing this whole project, like artificial intelligence research, I didn't actually know that much about it beforehand, but it was great hearing your perspective and clearing things up. So thank you so much. And
Yeah, no
I'm
problem.
sure this will help educate like people out there like me who also don't really know anything about this.
Yeah, no, hopefully, yeah.
So anyway, thank you and hope you have a successful life and see you all next time.
All right, thanks for having me.
Goodbye.